What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Scyushi, and this is going to end up being an Elden Ring tutorial talking about the basics of incantations, because there's a lot of things that people just don't really know about because the game, frankly speaking, doesn't explain it. And I've gathered all of this information from other videos and other, the wiki and everything like that, because I wanted to end up having it in a condensed guide that just lets you know what it is outright. So as a starting player, you might want to know what the heck is an incantation. Well, if we go to memorize spell, obviously I've got a lot of different magics in the game, so you kind of just got to ignore that. But the first category is going to be sorceries / incantations. Second category is sorceries specifically, and then support sorceries, and then incantations. So incantations, the big difference between them and sorceries is that sorceries are very, very static. So you're kind of stuck building your character towards intelligence, as we'll end up talking about a little bit later. Whereas incantations, you have a lot more room to breathe. Incantations will also end up dealing elemental damage, whereas sorceries will end up just dealing magic damage outright, and that's all there is to it. So with the incantations, you can have spells that'll end up doing physical damage, spells that'll end up doing fire, spells that end up doing lightning. Now, speaking of fire and lightning, did you know that when it's raining, or if you are in a body of water, your fire spells are going to end up being weaker because, you know, obviously the water is dissipating the flame, and then your lightning spells will actually be conducted and deal more damage. This also takes effect in the rain, which somebody ended up telling me about when I was playing on stream, which I thought was really, really cool. So that's why in Caelid you might end up doing a lot more lightning damage just because it's raining there all the time. But the point is that you kind of want to end up having a mixture with your incantations of different elements. You can try to build yourself towards one specific element or one specific school of incantations, which we'll get into those momentarily. But generally speaking, you want to be a master of all categories. There's going to be certain spells that will end up being super high damage dealers, some of them that are just focused on PvP, some of them that are going to end up being focused on dealing with mobs of enemies. And that's just kind of how the spells and weapons in general end up working. Now, on top of the offensive incantations, there's also going to be the support ones, and these can end up varying to insane degrees. You can end up having darkness, which creates a darkness that conceals the caster, essentially makes you invisible to most enemies, not necessarily bosses, or shadow bait, which puts down a little turret, well, not a turret, but like a distraction dummy that actually does work on bosses. But most of all, you're going to end up having a lot of different bosses. Golden Vow increases your attack and defense, and that does end up scaling with all of your spells. It's just overall defense in general, so you can use that before you go into battle as an incantation user. Flame Grant Me Strength is an ability you get later in the game that raises physical and fire affinity attack power, so again, that would end up boosting up your fire spells. There's lightning boosting and stuff like that. You can end up actually using buffs on your weapons as well, giving yourself fire damage negation and all sorts of other elements and so on and so forth. I'm just letting you guys know that there's the supportive abilities as well. Now, the next step is, how do you actually use an incantation? Maybe you've got some, maybe you don't know how to use them. Well, you're going to have a weapon that is called a seal. So the seals are going to end up being just under your sorceries. And there's, whoopsie daisy, I don't know why I did that. There's going to be quite a few of them. And as I mentioned before, the, sorceries are going to be highly dependent on intelligence, because as you'll notice when we end up going through all of these staves, all of them have different intelligence. Well, they all have different scalings, but generally speaking, they all scale off of intelligence. Seals are different. They're a lot less rigid, because essentially what you're going to be doing as a incantation user is, just because a spell requires faith to cast it, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to benefit by having more faith. That's not how the incantations nor how the spells work in the entire game. It is kind of for intelligence spells because, like I said, the weapon itself is going to end up scaling, because the biggest thing that you're trying to focus on as an incantation user, or even as a melee user, is the attribute scaling stats specifically. So looking at all of these seals, you'll see that all of them scale vastly different from one another, to the point where the Clawmark seal, for example, I love this as an example, because when you upgrade this bad boy, it scales off of strength, which means that you can be a strength character using great swords and stuff like that, but still using incantations and being just as effective as somebody like me who is a full arcane build, right? I just think that that's so cool. Now, speaking of the incantation schools, you can see this boosts bestial incantations, this boosts Godslayer, this boosts Giant Flame, this boosts Frenzied Flame, this boosts Dragon Communion, this one boosts Dragon Cult. What does all of that mean? Well, if we end up going into the different incantations, I can kind of give you an idea of what it is without going full on into detail. So Dragon Communion is basically going to end up being all of the Dragon Breaths. Dragon Cult is going to end up being all the elemental dragon abilities, so like the Dragon Lightning and so forth. Golden Order is going to end up being all the spells that are related to the Golden Order. There is also going to be a seal that boosts Crucible abilities, so that, you know, basically you could end up building your character towards one specific school. But you might be limiting yourself if you end up doing so, because, for example, a lot of the Dragon Cult abilities are going to end up being heavy lightning attacks, which means that if you end up fighting an opponent that is resistant to lightning, then you kind of are, you shouldn't be playing your character like that, right? Like, you should have some other elements that you can end up having. Now, with that out of the way, why am I dual wielding these? Well, because frankly speaking, I found out that the passive effect of these seals will stack if you dual wield them. Now, keep this in mind, okay? I have both of my Dragon Communion seals almost fully leveled up, right? Like, I'm trying to get this one to +10. I'm just letting you guys know you do not have to have the dual wielding seal at any level to see the benefits of it. I'm doing a very, very particular build where I'm actually using one ability in one hand, one ability in the other hand, back and forth, just because of cast time. I'll have another video talking about that, but my point is that you can have your secondary seal at level 1 and you'll still benefit from the passive effect, because the passive effect is just static numbers. But how do you end up getting a second seal in order to dual wield it? Well, you can have a friend of yours give them to you, or you can go and trade with other players. Generally speaking, you might have to wait until you get to New Game Plus before you can end up getting your hands on a second seal, because through your first playthrough, you'll usually only get one of each. And even then, you have to kind of go out of your way in order to end up getting them. I would still end up using the Dragon Communion seal for all of my incantations because I'm going full arcane because of the attribute scaling. But the only spells that are going to benefit from the dual wielding is the passive effect outright. So you could actually even do a mix smash. So let's say maybe I want to use Dragon Communion abilities, but I also want to use Dragon Cult abilities, right? So I would end up leveling this up, having this in my other hand, make sure that when I cycle to one of the Dragon Cult lightning spells, I would make sure that I use that seal appropriately. Now, another last really quick tip that I can let you guys know is if you're playing on controller, or I don't know what the button is on PC, but up on the D-pad is going to be your default keybind to end up cycling through the spells. But if you end up holding up, like just hold the button, it'll end up cycling back to the first spell that you have. This also works for your flasks as well. So if you have like a whole bunch of consumable items on your hotbar down below, you can just hold down on the D-pad, and then that'll end up cycling you back to the thing that you have on your first, the first thing on your hotbar. That's always what it does. So first spell on my hotbar is the fire spell, for example. Anyways, hopefully that ended up covering everything for you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Smash like, sub for more. Buy the merch you want to support the channel. Like I said, I got some other weirder Elden Ring videos that are going to be coming out, more specifically talking about a very, very strange set of builds. I really love this game, and I really feel like I'm starting to get the hang of how the incantations work, because intelligence and just weapons in general work very, very differently. I love the fact that incantations can just be kind of forced into any class in the game.